In today's video, we have some NHL trade rumors I want to discuss, mostly focusing on the Edmonton Oilers, Boston Bruins, and New Jersey Devils. Plus, I came across an article through The Athletic discussing the possibility could we see an Edmonton and Calgary swap of bad contracts. We'll get into all the details of that coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have some updated NHL trade rumors I wanted to discuss here today. And I want to get started with the Boston Bruins and New Jersey Devils possibly being linked here to a potential trade. Now, as I discussed yesterday, the Boston Bruins certainly need to clear some cap space. And one of the players they'd love to be able to move is the final 2 years on the contract for forward David Backes, who's getting paid $6 million to basically be a fourth-line player and oftentimes a healthy scratch. And that's really tying up a lot of cap space as they need to sign some key RFA players like Brandon Carlo and Charlie McAvoy. I came across an article through Boston Hockey Now by Jimmy Murphy indicating he has sources that the New Jersey Devils might actually be interested in taking on the contract here of David Backes if the Bruins are willing to include some sort of a sweetener, so that could be a prospect, a draft pick, something that would be desirable for them, or possibly do some retained salary so they don't have to pay him the full $6 million. But the Devils have lots of cap space, and I would assume here they would prefer the sweetener to take that on, because obviously with Backes playing the way he has been, I'm not sure that they really need a player like him. They can afford it based on their cap situation, but they likely would only do it if there's something extra in it for them. Now, I know based on previous trades here, Don Sweeney's probably very reluctant to give up the 2020 first round pick, so I really don't think he'd want to include that, but they do have some other interesting prospects that very well might be of interest in New Jersey that very well could get a deal like this done. But obviously, like I said, the Bruins need to clear space. If they could move that contract of David Backes, that would really go a long ways to helping the Bruins out. And if the Devils are interested in continuing to build for their future here, which they clearly are, and add a nice prospect while taking on that contract here, that very well could be appealing to them as well. In yesterday's video discussing the Bruins' possible trade rumors here, many had questioned the possibility of maybe buying out Backes, but at this point where he still has 2 years on the deal, it certainly becomes a little bit more expensive when they're tied to that contract longer term. Basically how a buyout works, in case you're not familiar, is the contract, depending on the player's age, in this case, he'd still have 2/3 of the remaining salary paid out over twice the duration, so the Bruins would be linked to that contract and have a form of a cap hit on the Backes deal for 4 years instead of 2. So obviously, if they don't trade him, or regardless of who holds on to that Backes contract, they can get through one more season, then they could consider a buyout after that until the final year, so they'd only have 1 year left. It would be a lot less expensive, and they'd only have to add 1 additional year to their cap hit instead of 2 at this point. So I really don't think a buyout is likely, but it certainly is more likely, I think, after 1 more season. Now, there's always a possibility because he's also battled a lot of injuries. Can he get through 1 more year and remain healthy and actually play out the contract? That's certainly going to be, a test as well for him. And if for any reason he's not, ends up on LTIR, well, that's a whole other type of cap relief that you can obtain here depending on the player's health. So I guess we will see here, but right now it looks as though if the Bruins have an option to move Backes, New Jersey might be the team that they hook up with here to facilitate a trade. Now, there's also been some talk, as I mentioned, around the Edmonton Oilers, which we're going to get into an article here from The Athletic here momentarily, but there was some other rumors as well that they'd really like to move a defenseman, probably either Benning or Russell. Benning probably is the more likely one, considering that Russell has a no-trade clause, so trading him will be more challenging for sure, but could they possibly include a sweetener? Obviously, as we know, they're looking to move Jesse Puljujarvi, so could we possibly see a deal involving one of their defensemen as well as a Jesse Puljujarvi for a scoring winger? The article referencing this possibility certainly looks at a few players around the NHL, including the Los Angeles Kings, who had previously inquired on Jesse Puljujarvi, but were told they'd have to take Lucic, but instead could they maybe take a defenseman and inquire Puljujarvi for a possible scoring winger? Would they consider moving Tyler Toffoli? There's no guarantee that they would. He's got 1 year left on his contract, and there's certainly some debate whether or not he's going to be kept in the fold or extended. So I guess we'll remain to be seen on that, but it's certainly just some food for thought. We know that the Kings were previously interested in Puljujarvi, so would they consider that deal? Because obviously I think the Kings are likely going to continue going through a bit of a rebuild here and likely going to shed some more veterans here over the next little while, and a lot of their other veterans that are tied to super long-term contracts may prove to be impossible to move. So a player like Toffoli, who's kind of not really a youngster but not really an older veteran either, it's kind of debatable whether or not a player like him stays in LA longer term or not. This article also referenced a possibility as well about them maybe talking to the Nashville Predators about a winger like Mikael Granlund or Craig Smith. As we've discussed before, the Predators need to shed some salary as well. And after signing Matt Duchene, certainly have an excess of center icemen, but trading Kyle Turris might prove to be very difficult. And some recent comments from GM David Poile kind of made it sound like they're willing to hang on to him to see if he bounces back here. But at the center ice position, they've got Johansson, they've got Duchene, they've got Turris, they've got Colton Sissons, Nick Bonino. But they could instead maybe move one of those guys to a wing and maybe trade a winger instead. Like I mentioned, maybe Granlund or Smith would be a possibility, because that's kind of what the Oilers would need here. They need somebody who can play the wing with some decent pace and score. So one of those guys would possibly be a fit there as well. So those are just some possibilities here that this article is referencing that the Oilers might look to do. So this is just food for thought here from an Oilers perspective from David Staples of the Edmonton Journal. So I guess we'll see. Certainly some interesting concepts there. But the Oilers definitely need more scoring on the wings for sure in order to move this team forward. There's no doubt about that. Now jumping into the article here from The Athletic, talking about the possibility, could we see the Edmonton Oilers and the Calgary Flames swap bad contracts? Now I'm going to show you some excerpts here from this article. We're only going to read bits and pieces here, but I will link it down in the description. Reminder as well, The Athletic is a subscription-based service, so if you have a subscription and haven't read this article, it will be linked down below. And if you're not subscribed, it's certainly recommended. It's certainly some great content there, and it's not very expensive to subscribe to. The article starts here and says, when Michael Furlan signed a 4-year, $14 million contract with Vancouver this past week, it probably eliminated the last 1% of a possibility that Milan Lucic might end up playing for his hometown Canucks next season. There was a tiny bit of traction for a Lucic to Vancouver move earlier this offseason in that maddeningly challenging your bad contract for my bad contract trade vein. Teams and the NHL GMs pitch those ideas all the time. So, of course, there he's referencing the Lucic for Eriksson possibility that we've discussed here before. Obviously has never happened, and at this point looking like it's impossible and will not happen. In any event, if Lucic still needs a new home and now isn't going to be repatriated to Vancouver, then does it make sense to ponder a swap to Calgary? Now, a percentage of you will immediately scroll to the comments and say, 1. Calgary and Edmonton would never make a trade because of the rivalry runs too deep. Number 2, Lucic makes too much money and Calgary is cash-strapped at the moment, so how does that make any sense? If you're still prepared to hear me out, the third question is, which player might Edmonton take back to make the cap consequences work? Because realistically, the deal would be primarily motivated by the financial side of it as opposed to the competitive consequences. You can rate Edmonton's right side in any order you like, but projections on dailyfaceoff.com has Zach Kassian there on the top line, followed by the unhappy Jesse Puljujarvi, then Sam Gagner and Jujhar Khaira. Sorry, but if Kassian's your number one right wing, then you have an opening or two to fill, and a dice or two you might want to roll. Now to Lucic. James Neal probably has a greater upside, but is 9 months older than Lucic. Both are 31, but Lucic is a June 88 birthday and Neal a September 87. Also, though, Lucic carries a slightly higher cap charge. Once his $3 million signing bonus for the 1920 season is paid, the total dollars remaining on his contract shrink to $15 million, an additional $3 million in base salary for this year, then $4 million and $5 million and $4 million owed on the final 3 years of the contract. Neal is a straight across the board $5.75 million annually. Lucic does have a no trade protection, but said publicly he would waive to play in Vancouver. Would he do the same in Calgary? It's hard to say. In Edmonton, Neal could potentially play in the top 6, where you really can't see that happening in Calgary. The chemistry between Neal and Gaudreau was 0 last year. Part of the push to recruit Neal to Calgary last offseason came thanks to a prior relationship with goalie Mike Smith, an off-ice friend who helped sell him on the destination. Smith, of course, is no longer tending goal for Calgary. He's now an Oiler. In Calgary, Lucic could step in and fill the role occupied last season by Garnet Hathaway, who left as a free agent to sign with Washington. Naturally, you need to start with the premise that it isn't working out for either player in their current markets at their respective price points. Lucic with 4 years to go at $6 million, Neal with 4 years to go at $5.75. Life is a gamble, and life for NHL GMs with contracts they're trying to shed and value to extract, they need to sometimes look outside the box for solutions. And that's one transaction that would be fun to watch unfold. So essentially here, both these players have the same term left on their contract. It's only $250,000 difference in salary, Lucic making slightly more. So if Lucic would waive, he could go to the Flames, play a bottom 6 role, kind of be more that physical type of player that he can still be, replace Garnet Hathaway, who took off to go to Washington via free agency. James Neal could come come to Edmonton, probably play more offensive roles since they desperately need scoring wingers, and likely both of them could be more valuable to each of the teams if they swap positions here. Now, of course, if James Neal kind of takes off and gets back to his scoring ways with the Oilers, then obviously the Flames are not going to be overly thrilled with that, and perhaps they would ask for a little bit more from the Oilers instead of doing a straight up one-for-one trade. It's hard to say, but if the Oilers were able to even retain a slight amount of salary there to even things out, could that trade make sense? Now, we discussed possibly Eriksson for Lucic. We looked at a three-way trade between Calgary, Vancouver, and Edmonton before. But really, this one probably makes more sense based on dollars and terms, and swapping uniforms might be the fresh start that each of these players actually need. So if you're Calgary or you're Edmonton, would you consider making that move? And do you see it being a possibility here that both of them could swap places and get their careers back on track, or at least be more valuable than they currently are today with their existing clubs? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.